Here's what's coming up on the program. The 76th General Assembly opens at the United Nations headquarters in New York, with the UN telling the world it must wake up and unite in the face of climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. The call is also echoed by US President Joe Biden on the first day of the UNGA. Plus, a third Russian faces charges for involvement in the 2018 Salisbury poisonings. A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. I'm Teniola Shibowale in Lagos. The 76th session of the General Assembly begins today at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Giving the opening address, Secretary General Antonio Guterres reprimanded the world for the inequitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, describing it as an obscenity and scoring the world an F in ethics. Out of 5.7 billion doses of coronavirus vaccines administered around the world, only 2% have been in Africa. The Secretary General is pushing for a global plan to vaccinate 70% of the world by the first half of next year.
The world must wake up. We are on the edge of an abyss and moving in the wrong direction. We are weeks away from the UN climate conference in Glasgow, but seemingly light years away from reaching our targets. We must get serious and we must act fast. Excellencies, COVID and the climate crisis have exposed profound fragilities as societies and as a planet. Yet instead of humility in the face of these epic challenges, we see hubris. Instead of the path of solidarity, we are on a dead end to destruction. At the same time, another disease is spreading in our world today, a malady of mistrust. When people see promises of progress denied by the realities of their harsh daily lives, when they see their fundamental rights and freedoms curtailed, when they see petty as well as grand corruption around them, when they see billionaires joyriding to space while millions go hungry on Earth, when parents see a future for their children that looks even bleaker than the struggles of today, and when young people see no future at all. The people we serve and represent may lose faith not only in their governments and institutions, but in the values that have animated the work of the United Nations for over 75 years.
We'll be hearing more from Mr. Guterres over the next 5 years as he begins a second term as Secretary General of the global body. Well, UN President Joe Biden also spoke on the first day of the Assembly, echoing Mr. Guterres' words on the global pandemic, then going on to highlight issues of climate change, cyber threats, and managing the shift of what he calls global power dynamics. He says the US aims to lead the fight against COVID-19 and that he will announce additional US commitments at tomorrow's global COVID-19 summit. The president, who has been facing backlash over the AUKUS pact with the UK and Australia, also defended the chaotic US withdrawal from Afghanistan, arguing that it was a necessary step to pivot US policy to focus on a global challenge from anti-democratic systems, the COVID-19 pandemic, and climate change.
We've ended 20 years of conflict in Afghanistan. And as we close this period of relentless war, we're opening a new era of relentless diplomacy, of using the power of our development aid to invest in new ways of lifting people up around the world. And as the United States turns our focus to the priorities and the regions of the world, like the Indo-Pacific, that are most consequential today and tomorrow, we'll do so with our allies and partners through cooperation and multilateral institutions like the United Nations, to amplify our collective strength and speed our progress toward dealing with these global challenges. It is a fundamental truth of the 21st century within each of our countries and as a global community that our own success is bound up in others succeeding as well. To deliver for our own people, we must also engage deeply with the rest of the world to ensure that our own future We must work together with other partners, our partners, toward a shared future. Our security, our prosperity, and our very freedoms are interconnected, in my view, as never before. And so, I believe we must work together as never before.
Our correspondent, Maria Bird, has been monitoring things from Washington. Maria, once again, we find President Joe Biden defending the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan following criticisms and praise weeks later. Do you think he had to reiterate America's foreign policy to the UN Assembly?
Janela, thank you for having me. Yes, I think that what he is really trying to do is to show that he's different from the previous administration. He went in saying that he was going to show that the U.S. today is different than it was in the Trump administration. So that was his real focus on being able to reiterate his foreign policy measures. As you all mentioned, and as you said earlier, the diplomacy was a huge factor in what he was trying to bring forth. I think that many across the globe and even in the U.S. are questioning, is he focusing on coming together, or is he going to begin to initiate additional conflict? And so that, I think, was one of his reasons for really focusing in on his foreign policy measures that are focusing more on diplomacy, peaceful resolution, rather than conflict.
There's likely to be increased focus on climate change at this year's Assembly. Going by the address by the Secretary General and the US President, the UN is, of course, riding on the wings of recent reports that the world is still on course to heat up to dangerous levels. Now, COP26 is 2 months away. How much of an impact do you think discussions at the UNGA could play a major role in shaping the direction of leaders then?
These conversations will definitely impact, I think, the conversations that will be had at that time. But the real question is, how much is President Biden going to be able to collect data in the U.S. as it relates to some real threats that we have with climate change? We know we have raging fires on the West. We know that the U.S. has dealt with, obviously, many hurricanes, and some of that is due to the climate change issues that exist. So how much is he going to be able to provide insight into how the U.S. plans to address the issues here that obviously are impacting the globe, and how prepared will he be to ask the correct questions that could potentially lead to answers as to how to address not only U.S. climate control changes, but around the world and the global changes that need to be reviewed.
And finally, Maria, about, vaccinations, just 2% in Africa so far. And the UN chief, who didn't really mince his words today, do you think leaders feel remorseful about this as it stares them in the face?
The hope is that they understand the point that was brought out with that. I mean, we are unfortunately at a time where there has been clear indication that the focus is always internal, it's home. I mean, whether it's the U.S. or whether it's the UK. As it's been mentioned time and time again, we're now in the phase of boosters in America, where, in the UK is beginning to look at boosters. But the point of regarding 2% overseas, and specifically Africa, have been vaccinated, I think is something that will resonate home. Will we potentially see some aid efforts happening over the next few weeks? Most likely we will, but will it be not just aid efforts, but efforts to build infrastructure and to build real capacity for vaccinations in the continent? I think that is the question, and I think that is going to be where I think the remaining eyes are going to be from the UN on the US and countries like the UK and other countries that have had oversupplies of vaccines.
All right then, Maria, a lot to keep our eyes on. Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed.
Thank you for having me.
Well, this could also come up as leaders begin debates today, the immigration crisis along the U.S. southern border, where hundreds of thousands are awaiting processing whether to be granted asylum or be sent back. A camp under a bridge spanning the Rio Grande, Texas, has become the latest flashpoint for U.S. authorities seeking to stem the flow of migrants fleeing gang violence, extreme poverty, and natural disasters in their home countries. The UN is interested in the people's fears about being sent back.
what we always repeat is no matter who you are, regardless of your migration status, everyone has the same rights and have the right to have the same protection. So we are concerned and express these surprise at the fact that it happened, and we will call for these images not to be repeated. Thank you.
We reiterate, as our colleagues have just mentioned, that while some people arriving at the border may not be refugees, anyone who does have a claim or claims to have a well-founded fear of being persecuted in their country of origin, they should have access to asylum and to have their claim assessed before being subjected to expulsion or deportation. And we've been calling for an end to these Title 42 public health-related asylum restrictions for quite some time, and to ensure access to asylum for those whose lives really depend on it.
And on the sidelines of the Global Assembly in New York, EU foreign ministers have met to discuss Australia's scrapping of a $30 billion submarine order with France in favour of a US and British deal, as France says it has a crisis in confidence with Washington. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell did meet with the Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne at the same meeting. It's not clear if the dispute, which sort of pitches not just France but the EU against the United States at the moment, will have implications for the next round of EU-Australia trade talks scheduled for October the 12th. Diplomats are planning for a ministerial meeting of the parties in the 2015 nuclear deal on Wednesday, still on the sidelines of the UNGA in New York.
With the Australian counterpart, the Foreign Minister, Marise Payne. Certainly, I inquired about the reasons behind the lack of prior consultation on AUKUS and regretted that this alliance excluded European partners who have a strong presence in the Pacific, like is the case of France. And I stressed the fact that the current challenges to stability in the region call for more cooperation and coordination among like-minded partners. And certainly Australia, UK and US are like-minded partners with the European Union. More cooperation, more coordination, less fragmentation. Inside the Council, and my duty is to explain what has happened inside the Council, the position has been this clear expression of solidarity with France and the consideration that this was not a bilateral issue, but a relationship with the European Union that affects all of us, and also the fact that it doesn't go in the direction of a greater cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, which is our purpose.
Now, hanging on to power is how Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's win in recent snap election is being described. His main rival, Conservative leader Erin O'Toole, conceded defeat, saying Trudeau had won a clear mandate to govern, although he fell short of his goal for a majority win. Trudeau has been in power since 2015 and has governed with a minority House of Commons seat since 2019. He decided to gamble in the early vote and capitalized on his government's handling of the pandemic, which included massive spending to support individuals and businesses and a push for high vaccination rates.
My friend, you are sending us back to work with a clear mandate to get Canada through this pandemic and to the brighter days ahead. And my friends, that's exactly what we are ready to do. There are still votes to be counted, but what we've seen tonight is that millions of Canadians have chosen a progressive plan. Some have talked about division, but that's not what I see. That's not what I've seen these past weeks across the country. I see Canadians standing together in your determination to end this pandemic, together for real climate action, for $10 a day childcare, for homes that are in reach for middle-class families, for our shared journey on the path of reconciliation.
Still to come on the programme. Hong Kong's Ocean Park's Water World opens to ease pandemic fatigue. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. A third Russian faces charges over his alleged involvement in the 2018 Salisbury poisonings, which left 3 people critically ill and 1 dead. Security sources believe Denis Sergeyev was the ground commander in the Novichok attack on former double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. Dawn Sturgis died after the poisoning and a police officer was badly injured. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said that the suspects should be handed over for justice. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman said the UK is using the case as a tool to put pressure on the country.
FSB probably directed the operation.
We've identified another suspect in that case, in the Salisbury poisonings, a man called Denis Sergeyev. And I just want to say that we do believe that all the suspects should be handed over for justice. And I should point out to people in Russia who've been behind this that Russia has already paid a heavy price in the sense that there was the biggest ever diplomatic expulsion in response to the Skripal poisonings, with 28 countries expelling 153 diplomats around the world. But they should recognise that our sense that justice must be done is not abated. And Dawn Sturgis, an innocent member of the British public, died in that event, and we want to see those suspects handed over.
The VOA's Henry Ridgewell is in London. Henry, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. This is no surprise, as it only confirms what the UK has said and believed all along, that Russia was behind the poisonings. But what happens now?
Well, it depends on which case you're talking about. There are 2 different cases that have been brought forward today. Of course, one is the ruling from the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, which relates to the killing of Alexander Litvinenko in 2006. That was the first time that Russia had allegedly used radioactive poisoning on one of its former agents who had defected to the West. 2 agents were identified by Britain in a UK public inquiry 10 years later, and they said that the UK authorities said that the Russian state was responsible for Alexander Litvinenko's killing. His widow, Marina Litvinenko, then took the case to the European Court of Human Rights, and a verdict was delivered by that court today in which it echoed Britain's finding. It upheld that verdict that the Russian state was responsible for Litvinenko's killing. It said that Russia had failed to refute claims that they did not do it. It said that if it was a rogue operation, that Moscow should have been able to prove as such, but they had failed to, and held Russia responsible for it. Now, Russia is a signatory to the European Court of Human Rights, but the court doesn't hold any jurisdiction over Russia, so there will be no police force trying to arrest the suspects in that case, and Russia has always refused to extradite its nationals to Western countries. The court did say that Russia should pay Marina Litvinenko's costs of around $144,000, but dismissed her claim for punitive damages. The other case that you refer to there is the Salisbury poisonings of 2017 and the attempted killing of former double agent Sergei Skripal. He survived, as is his daughter Julia, but as you heard in your report there, Dawn Sturgis, a local woman, was killed and a police officer badly injured as well. Police in the UK identified 2 suspects there through CCTV footage. They were tracked travelling across the country to Salisbury and going close to the house where they put the the nerve agent Novichok around the door handle of the house and in other locations. In that case as well, the suspects managed to return to Russia, and today the UK government, as you heard from Boris Johnson there, said it had identified a 3rd suspect who was believed to be the coordinator on the ground of the entire operation. He's also suspected of being involved in numerous espionage activities by Russia in other countries in Europe. But all three men are believed to be back in Russia. They won't be extradited. So really this effort by Britain is to try to expose the activities of the Russian state, to try to put further pressure on Russia, and to persuade other countries to perhaps start their own investigations into suspect happenings on their soil too, and perhaps lead to the expulsion of further diplomats from European countries and other consequences for Russia too.
All right then, Henry, thank you so much for your reporting. Well, let's take a look at the COVID-19 pandemic now. As vaccinations increase all over the world, a mask-wearing public transport continues to decline, and transport unions, especially in the UK, fear it may be difficult to reintroduce the policy if the government decides to do so. The proportion of people using face coverings at major railways stations is estimated to have slumped around the world to 80%, from 80% to around 20%. Here's more on the situation across the world in our COVID-19 Global Update.
Global Update begins in Australia, where hundreds of citizens have demonstrated in lockdown Melbourne after authorities shut down construction sites in the city for 2 weeks, saying the frequent movement of workers was spreading the coronavirus into regional areas. The demonstrators moved through the city centre, throwing bottles, lightning flares and attacking police cars as they chant slogans against COVID-19 vaccines and lockdown measures. Melbourne has been under lockdown for 7 weeks as the city struggles to control the spread of the highly infectious Delta variant. Vietnam has relaxed some coronavirus restrictions in Hanoi after 2 months of lockdown. Under the new order, government offices, markets and essential services such as banking and takeaway restaurants are allowed to open. Schools remain closed and public events and gatherings of over 10 people are still banned. Public transport remains suspended. And finally, bookings for coronavirus vaccines have jumped in Italy after the government made inoculation mandatory for all workers. The new rules in the workplace are some of the strictest anti-coronavirus measures adopted in the world. According to provisional data, the number of people making appointments more than doubled at the end of last week in the northeastern region of Veneto, while in Tuscany, they almost tripled.
Finally on the program, as COVID-19 restrictions are being lifted around the world, people are looking forward to visiting fun spots and theme parks again. One of them is Hong Kong's latest water park, which officially opened its door to the public today. Hundreds of residents went visiting, featuring 27 indoor and outdoor attractions such as rainbow-colored slides, 17 tube slides and wave pools across an area spanning nearly 6.5 hectares. Ocean Park's Water World operated at half capacity under COVID-19 safety measures. The attraction, which suffered years of delays and was slated to open in 2017, is nearly twice as big as Hong Kong's previous water park, which closed its doors in 1997.
I've been waiting for this big project around 4 or 5 years since the first day, and it's always delayed. And I used to go on Disneyland, Ocean Park, and it's kind of frustrating, because Hong Kong is such a developed island. I would say the big island, and there are so many islands, and it's frustrating to wait and not see any water world, because every time I have to go to Shenzhen or somewhere else or back to my country. I don't know, but since it's open, it's so exciting, even it's like COVID, but I wouldn't say people regret it.
We have all been stuck here for too long. The recreational options, the leisure options in Hong Kong, I think most people have tried them all already. So to have a brand new world-class water park to open, I think should bring fun.
Well, it certainly will bring fun. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shiboale. Bye for now.